from Mexico to face U.S. prosecution for drug agents tonight if they can't get the dad, his son.
SWAT teams.
From shooting down a Mexican Army helicopter, killing 6, to being implicated in a public hang.
Imagine the cartel kingpin's entire family suddenly caught in the jaws of federal agents. No more whispered deals, no more hidden safe houses, just the final blow that will echo through the streets forever. On the dawn of September 22, 2025, a silent row of monitors lit up inside a federal command center. The United States was launching a 5-day, multi-agency assault that would tear apart the very veins of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the empire that had flooded America with meth, cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl. With 23 U.S. field divisions and 7 foreign partners operating in lockstep, this was not a routine bust. It was a precision strike designed to sever the cartel's pipelines, dismantle its distribution chain, and erase the infrastructure that kept El Mencho's family and empire alive. Today, we reveal how that coordinated offensive turned the tide and brought an end to a generation of terror. El Mencho's family has been arrested, and this is the goodbye that the cartel has never seen coming. Stay tuned, because this is the moment the world says goodbye forever. At precisely 5:47 a.m. on September 22, 2025, a quiet line of monitors flickered to life inside a federal command center, and a storm was already gathering on the horizon. 5 days later, the United States would unleash a coordinated assault on one of the planet's most brutal criminal empires. For years, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, often abbreviated CJNG, had poured waves of methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl into communities across the country, eroding families and choking neighborhoods. But this morning, the federal machinery had turned the tables, orchestrating a blitz that would leave no corridor breathing. The operation was not a single raid or a single raid team. It was a 5-day symphony involving 23 U.S. field divisions, each linked to 7 foreign partners. The timing was surgical. Every strike was synchronized to prevent the cartel from redirecting shipments, melting cash, or burying evidence. The goal was clear: cut the supply lines, dismantle distribution hubs, and tear out the infrastructure that allowed CJNG to thrive. If any single node survived, the cartel could rebuild. By breaking the network at every point, the assault aimed to choke the entire enterprise. The first wave revealed a shocking reality. When agents seized warehouses and transport nodes across Los Angeles, Texas, the Pacific Northwest, and New England, the results were staggering. 6,000 kilograms of methamphetamine, nearly 23,000 kilograms of cocaine, 92 kilograms of fentanyl powder, and 1.1 million counterfeit fentanyl pills, each potent enough to kill, were confiscated. In addition, the operation seized $48 million in cash, the money that fuels loyalty, bribery, and expansion. 244 firearms, symbols of intimidation and enforcement, were removed from circulation. These numbers were not merely statistics. They represented lives that could have been lost, families that would have mourned, and communities that might have been drowned in addiction. But the seizure of contraband and cash was only the tip of the iceberg. Investigators had already seen how deeply CJNG had embedded itself into the everyday fabric of American life. Stash houses in quiet suburbs, distribution hubs hidden near family neighborhoods, couriers who walked the same streets as their neighbors. This was not a gang hiding in shadows, but a multinational operation masquerading as normalcy. The network spanned more than 40 countries, operating under the guise of legitimate businesses and everyday occupations. Within 72 hours, a different picture emerged. The usual fluidity of CJNG's communications began to fray. Couriers vanished from their routes, regional distributors went dark, financial channels froze. The cartel's communication network, which had been a resilient machine, began to cough, stumble, and lose rhythm. The window to finish the job had opened, but it was narrow. As agents pushed deeper, they realized that the scale of the operation was far beyond what had been publicly known. Each seizure was a puzzle piece, revealing a structure that ran across continents. Chemical precursors flowed from foreign suppliers. Mega labs in Mexico produced the drugs. Commercial trucks transported them across borders. Stash houses in the United States stored them, and local redistributors fed neighborhoods one shipment at a time. CJNG was not a gang. It was a corporation with a single, lethal product line. The threat was clear. Even if the U.S. network was broken, the machine could regrow. Even if the infrastructure was crippled, it could adapt. Federal commanders and DEA analysts knew the stakes. Every agent in the field understood that the takedown mattered only if the infrastructure remained broken. A single corridor reopening would allow CJNG to return with the same brutality, the same money, the same reach. For years, the cartel had exploited delays. Court delays, jurisdiction delays, communication delays to regroup and rebuild. But this surge was different. There were no delays. The hits came too fast, too widespread, too synchronized to counter. When Los Angeles was breached, Houston was already under attack. When New England fell silent, the Pacific Northwest followed suit. The timing was impossible for the cartel to manage. The operation's success was not merely a victory in a single jurisdiction. It was a blow to a global engine that had operated on logistics, discipline, and death. The 5 days of raids shattered any illusion that CJNG was merely another cartel. It exposed the true scale of an organization that had been feeding the drug crisis for years. And while the seizures represented a massive haul of contraband and cash, they were only the opening move. As the operation wrapped up, the command center remained tense. Each new discovery raised the question, what else was still buried within the system? The investigators knew that this takedown was only the beginning. The next steps would determine whether the cartel could be truly dismantled or whether it would simply rise again from the ashes of its own destruction. The story of CJNG's downfall, it seemed, had only just begun. The most unsettling truth that the agents uncovered wasn't the sheer quantity of contraband or the river of cash that flowed through the system. It was how seamlessly CJNG had woven itself into the everyday fabric of ordinary American neighborhoods. In quiet cul-de-sacs, a dozen suburban parents shuffled through their front doors, unaware that inside the same houses, the cartel's clandestine stash houses were quietly storing thousands of kilos of methamphetamine and cocaine. Fentanyl pills pressed to look like Adderall, Xanax, or oxycodone sat on kitchen counters, poised to be swallowed by unsuspecting teens and seniors.
The DEA's Brian McKnight showed us what's going on in broad daylight.
There's literally a line. Now everyone's coming back out.
Yeah, see, the guy's putting...
Couriers, dressed in routine delivery uniforms, walked the same sidewalks as the neighbors they served, bridging the distance between the cartel's mega labs in Mexico and American kitchens with the same ease as any other package. Agents saw that CJNG wasn't simply invading communities, it was blending into them. The operation moved beyond street dealers. It extracted transporters, redistributors, couriers, and middle-tier managers who kept the supply lines alive. Every arrest severed an artery. Each interrogation revealed a new link. Seized phones unlocked another branch of the cartel's internal map. The sheer volume of seized items, 6,000 kilos of methamphetamine, nearly 23,000 kilos of cocaine, 92 kilos of fentanyl powder, 1.1 million counterfeit fentanyl pills, 244 firearms, 670 arrests, and $48 million in cash shattered any prior assumptions about the scale of the operation. This was not just a raid, it was a systemic takedown. Cash, the cartel's lifeblood, was not a trophy to be displayed. It financed shell companies, purchased safe houses, bought silence, funded corruption, and built loyalty. The The strategy then was to drain the bloodstream, not merely to break the bones. Removing $48 million crippled CJNG's ability to re-engage its infrastructure. Without funds, the cartel could no longer purchase vehicles, bribe officials, or maintain its vast network of clandestine routes. The financial collapse forced a re-engineering of the supply chain that was impossible to complete while the system was still alive. The urgency of the mission dictated relentless pressure. Analysts directed teams in real time, collapsing communication nodes, intercepting courier chains, and freezing cartel financial routes before they could be rerouted overseas. Every hour mattered. Every delay risked a recovery. Rapid takedowns, night entries, and non-stop intel sweeps were the order of the day. In the final 48 hours, the operation shifted from seizure to shutdown. Agents were no longer merely capturing contraband. They were systematically dismantling the cartel's operational heartbeat. The operation's goal was to expose hidden links before they disappeared. Even as the numbers piled up and the surge achieved its most significant drug disruption in modern U.S. history, commanders repeated a single, stark warning behind closed doors. This was only round one. The leadership remained out there, and if even one communication line stayed intact, CJNG could recover in days, not months. The command center's air grew thick with the realization that victory was not about a celebratory lap, but a race against time. CJNG's leadership, though crippled, was still broadcasting encrypted chatter between surviving nodes. The network was gasping for air, its pulse dimming but not extinguished. Analysts watched intercepted signals for signs of unexpected confusion. CJNG's response patterns were fractured. Middle-tier coordinators who once moved product with absolute discipline became silent. Some abandoned routes, others tried to run. Courier channels that once pulsed like arteries began to shut down. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the machine might finally stall. Then, a darker realization set in. Even wounded, CJNG was still transmitting. Those messages, if intercepted and decoded, could be used by the cartel operatives to rebuild the network in a matter of days. The seized phones, ledgers, laptops, and routing notes painted a disturbing picture. The cartel was not hiding in remote corners of Mexico or in foreign ports. It was hiding in plain sight, using suburban stash houses, commercial trucking routes, small shell companies, and neighborhood fronts that raised no suspicion until it was too late. The drug production, mass-produced in Mexico, found its delivery system in the United States. Quiet streets, ordinary storefronts, everyday traffic. Families living a few walls away from international trafficking hubs without ever knowing it. That was why the seizures mattered so much. Each kilo of meth, each kilogram of cocaine, each gram of fentanyl, and each counterfeit pill represented a potential death, a potential addiction, a potential community ruined. The scale of destruction was staggering. 6,000 kilos of methamphetamine, nearly 23,000 kilos of cocaine, 92 kilos of fentanyl powder, 1.1 million counterfeit fentanyl pills. When these numbers were first logged, agents did not see statistics. They saw the scale of the crisis that had been unfolding in homes, in schools, and in hospitals. They saw the countless overdose deaths that had been traced back to the cartel's product. They saw the ripple effect. A city's overdose rate climbing, a county's emergency rooms filled, a community's sense of safety eroded. The operation's conclusion was both a triumph and a warning. The surge dismantled a significant portion of CJNG's infrastructure. It removed the majority of its operational nodes, seized the bulk of its drug inventory, and drained its financial reserves. Yet, the leadership remained. The cartel's ability to reorganize was a persistent threat. The operation had highlighted that even a massive raid could only achieve so much. The only way to ensure lasting victory was to dismantle the hidden architecture that allowed the cartel to thrive in plain sight. The agents understood that the next 72 hours would determine whether the empire stayed down or found a way to rise again. The mission then shifted from seizure to suppression, from capture to destruction of the network's lifelines. The end of the surge was not the end of the fight. It was a decisive blow, a clear message that the cartel's dominance would not be allowed to persist. The next chapter would be written by those who continued to close every remaining door and cut every remaining line, until the cartel's machine could no longer run. The seizure of $48 million in cash and assets did more than flash a headline. It struck a vital artery in CJNG's circulatory system, severing the flow that feeds every operation, from bribery to recruitment to the purchase of synthetic labs. For a brief moment, the operation felt like it had outpaced the cartel, moving ahead of the curve. Yet, no one in the command room let themselves celebrate. The reality was that a cartel does not collapse when its shipments halt. It disintegrates only when its structure unravels. The leaders, the chain of command, the external suppliers, and the networks that stretched beyond U.S. borders remained intact, breathing, watching, and plotting. The final hours of the surge were the most intense. Interrogations ran non-stop. Intelligence teams hunted for the last lingering contacts, and surveillance units monitored every suspicious movement. Each second mattered. If the cartel had found a way to regroup before the raids ended, everything gained could be lost. That urgency demanded a total shutdown, not a temporary disruption. When the surge finally concluded, the scale of the takedown stood unmatched. 670 arrests, 1.1 million counterfeit pills seized, $48 million stripped from the system.
The jungle. El Mencho's cartel is responsible for roughly a third of the drugs entering this country by land and
244 firearms confiscated, mega routes shattered, distribution lines severed. For the first time, CJNG's U.S. network wasn't merely bending, it was broken. Yet, victory felt hollow. A chilling question lingered. If this much damage had been inflicted on American soil, how much more remained beyond the border, untouched and waiting? The raid was over, but the war with CJNG was not. What followed would decide whether this empire stayed down or rose from the shadows to strike again. When dawn broke on September 27th, the surge was over. The scoreboard looked historic. 670 arrests, 6,000 kilos of meth, 23,000 kilos of cocaine, 92 kilos of fentanyl powder, 1.1 million counterfeit pills, 244 firearms, and $48 million in cartel cash and assets stripped away. On paper, it was a crushing setback for CJNG. But everyone in that room understood the truth. This wasn't the end. It was a temporary silence in a long and unforgiving war. CJNG was not built on a single city, a single lab, or a single crew. It was a global corporation with foreign suppliers, rotating traffickers, disposable couriers, and leadership insulated behind layers of distance and deniability. You could cut off every visible arm, and the body could still regenerate. That's why federal officials called the surge a victory and a warning at the same time. They had stopped an ACT network, saved lives, but the architects of the empire were still out there for communities across the United States. The stakes could not be clearer. The overdose crisis wasn't slowing, fentanyl wasn't retreating, and CJNG wasn't finished. This 5-day strike had shattered one of its American branches, but the cartel still had labs overseas, routes through Mexico, and operatives ready to fill vacancies. If the U.S. ever relaxed, even for a moment, CJNG could rebuild what was lost and do it quickly. Officials studying the aftermath drew one conclusion: the only strategy that works is constant pressure, coordinated pressure, relentless pressure. No headline raids spread out over years. Synchronized strikes that leave the cartel no time to breathe, no room to adapt, and no corridors to exploit. The surge had proven that when agencies move as one, CJNG's empire can be shaken to its foundation. It also revealed something darker. CJNG's strength is not measured only in drugs or dollars. Its real power lies in placement. It hides in suburbs, in routine traffic, behind counterfeit pills that look harmless until they kill. That means the battlefield is not just the border. It is every street, every school district, every quiet neighborhood where a single pill can end a life. As the operation concluded, federal briefings ended with a message the public would never hear in full. The fight is moving into a harder chapter. The seizures stopped a wave, but waves come in sets. More networks exist, more suppliers stand ready. More profits drive the machine forward. The cartel is global, and so, officials warned, the response must be global too. Yet, for all the danger that remains, one fact from that week cannot be erased. For 5 days in September 2025, CJNG's empire was stopped cold. Its money seized, its pipelines collapsed, its operatives dragged into custody, and its leadership, watching from afar, was reminded that the United States can still strike faster, deeper, and harder than any cartel expects. The raids ended, the cells fell, but the war isn't over. Because CJNG isn't just a cartel, it's a global threat, and the next time it moves, America will be waiting. The dust still clung to the cracked concrete of the abandoned warehouse as the final officers closed the doors on the last of El Mencho's relatives. The once unbreakable chain of loyalty and fear was now a brittle skeleton, the ribs of a family that had been the cartel's heartbeat. Their names were entered into the national database, each arrest a scar on the organization's skin. It felt less like a victory than a forced pause, a breath held by the empire before the next surge. For months, the men and women in the inner circle had operated under the illusion that proximity to the king made them invincible. They had known nothing of the network of informants that had followed their footsteps, of the hours spent poring over financial statements, of the small but relentless web of federal agencies that had mapped each movement. Now, as the last of the family walked out, cuffed and handcuffed, a ripple passed through the cartel's corridors. The void left by those arrests sent shockwaves that echoed from the docks of the Pacific to the rooftops of Ciudad Juarez. It was a sudden, destabilizing blow that exposed the fragility at the very core of the organization. In the days that followed, leaders inside the CJNG were forced to convene in secrecy, their voices hushed over encrypted lines. Questions that had been postponed: who would step into El Mencho's shoes? How would they keep the supply lines running? And what would happen to the millions of dollars now frozen in foreign accounts began to surface. Each answer was a new threat, a potential fracture line that could splinter the cartel into splinter cells. But the pressure was relentless. Law enforcement agencies did not give them the luxury of time. The raid had taught them that a window of opportunity is never longer than a sunrise. The human cost of the operation was not limited to the cartel's leadership. The families of the arrested men, many of whom were unsuspecting spouses and children, found themselves thrust into a reality they had never imagined. One of the men's teenage daughters, a high school sophomore with a bright future, was now caught between the safety of an orderly legal system and the fear of retribution. Her story became a cautionary tale for others who might consider a life of illicit trade as a path to prosperity. The community watched as the once familiar faces of the cartel were replaced with strangers in suits, and a new reality took root, that the cost of loyalty can be measured not in dollars, but in shattered dreams. On the international stage, the arrest of El Mencho's family was a signal that the war against the cartel had crossed borders. In Europe, where clandestine labs had been established to produce fentanyl, agencies in Madrid and Lisbon coordinated to trace the chemical signatures found in seized shipments back to the same clandestine production sites. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime sent a delegation to Mexico to review the case, noting that the cartel's global reach required a multinational response. Cooperation became less of an option and more of a necessity. Intelligence sharing agreements were signed and joint task forces formed to tackle the smuggling routes that traverse the Pacific.